Today, I'd like to introduce a very long-standing friend of mine that I've known since the early 90s when I was still in the commercial crime unit. Kevin was a damn good fraud prosecutor. Basically owns his own law firm now. I'll just go through Kevin's bio here for you. Kevin is actually a practicing attorney, solicitor, as they call them internationally, of the High Court of South Africa. He's based in Durban, South Africa. He's a member of the South African Legal Practice Council, specializing in criminal and environmental law. He obtained his BProc degree at the University of the Free State in 1986 and his LLB degree from the UFS as well in 1988. Kevin has 32 years of litigation experience, which includes being a senior prosecutor in Durban, and I'll tell you, he assisted me with many, many commercial fraud and theft cases in the 90s. He's prosecuting high-profile environmental cases as well. He has a passion for training and capacity building of wildlife enforcement officials, lawyers, and the judiciary in the criminal and environmental law. He has an international experience in legislative review and writing. The not-for-profit company, Green Law Foundation, of which he is a co-director and co-founder, is the vehicle which he has a passion for, and his conservation is exercised. He has vast international experience. I know he even spoke at the Wildlife Trafficking Conference in Davos a few years ago. He's also acted as a specialist legal environmental advisor and consultant for international as well as South African public and private environmental agencies. Kevin is a specialist legal consultant to the UNODC. I'd like to hand over to Kevin. It's going to be really an interesting presentation, so I think you can all take note. It's not what we normally have, but it definitely ties into the topic of what the ACFE locally and worldwide stands for and fights for. Thank you very much, Kevin. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Len. And it is a great honor for me to be asked to address your association. And I know of the fantastic work and the high standards you uphold from the early years as prosecutor and into my private practice. I've always seen and met many of your members, and for me, it is an absolute honor to actually be able to address you on a topic that's very close to my heart, and that is our environment and how it's being protected, and how, in the interests of justice in our criminal courts, that what is being done to be able to protect our environment, which also refers back to Section 24 of our Constitution, where we have the right to a clean environment, and that our government must make sure that it's protected for us, because really that's our heritage. And in terms of that, I have a passion for passing on some knowledge to those environmental agencies who are dealing with the front line of combating illegal wildlife crime and environmental crime, and more specifically also the combating of transnational organized crime. So for me, thank you very much. And I'll take you through just a little a look at the concepts of what I deal with and what we are dealing with in dealing with the combating of illegal wildlife crime, and where you, and as members in your various capacities through the value chain of dealing with fraud and corruption and disputed documents or the rest, that you will play a very important role. Because everyone always asks me, so Kevin, yes, it sounds, how do we get involved, or what do we do? So your expertise in dealing with this in whatever avenue you are working will be able to understand how this is actually happening and what is actually happening in terms of combating this. First of all, detecting it, investigating it, and then combating it. So I'm going to then just go on to my presentation, and I'm going to start that and just talk through it as we go along. So the importance, today's topic really is the importance of combating fraud and corruption, and how this is a door to wildlife trafficking, and what do we do to fight it, and how do we detect it, and just giving you some practical examples, because I feel people always walk away from these webinars, seminars, or whatever, from looking at the visuals often of how this all works. All right, so on to the next slide, which is really talking to the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, to which I've done work over the years, and it is a great honor for me to work internationally with this United Nations office, which is situated in Vienna. Now they deal with various projects, from human trafficking to combating human trafficking, drugs, all forms of terrorism, and then obviously wildlife trafficking, and as well as that of the illegal smuggling and trafficking of forests, of wood, the combating of forest crimes, as well as IUU fishing, which is the illegal and unregulated fisheries and fisheries crimes. So in their wildlife crime report, which they give out annually, I thought this was an important quote, because they say that corruption is and is found to be a critical enabler of the illicit wildlife trade, and taking place at the sourcing, the transit, and the exchange stages, and involving public and private sector abuse of power and trust. And therefore, they say further, it is vital that enforcement agencies identify, investigate, and prosecute fraud and corruption offences in the value chain of wildlife trafficking. So that gives you the international perspective of and of a lot of what you already know, how we in the various roles that we play, whether it's in the private sector or in the public sector, that we need to understand that this is an enabler. One can have the best legal framework, which is then your legislation and your laws, but corruption is there's the one aspect of it which, despite having the best legislation, could undo the whole fragment of your legal system if it's allowed to carry on. And this is the doorways where organized crime will actually have to go to, because they, in the organized crime syndicates, cannot function where the officials and those that have to uplift and uphold our law are doing their work properly and making sure that the law is being upheld, and that those who are in conflict thereof will be brought to justice, and that justice will be done. So that is where the word enabling comes through. Now, internationally, there's frameworks that give the various countries, if you are a signatory or a party state to the UN Convention of Transnational Organized Crime, and you can see it was entered into on the 29th of September 2003, and there's 190 countries which are parties to this convention. And in this convention, it really sets out in its articles, it sets out what the parties need to do to be able to combat transnational organized crime and bring certain features into their domestic legislation so that it can apply to the jurisdiction of that country. So, the United Nations, in that way, it actually then starts saying to the parties, these are the concepts that you need to look at. This is what is internationally recognized. And therefore, US parties need to be able to bring this into your domestic legislation to make sure your citizens actually comply. So this is an important convention, and you can actually go and download this whole convention for free on the UNODC website. They've got a fantastic library that deals with all these aspects in terms of combating wildlife, fisheries, and forestry crime internationally. So that's an important aspect we need to look at. So what does this convention really look at? It looks at, and it talks about what is the scope of application. It applies to the prevention, investigation, and the prosecution of offenses established by the convention. So there are certain offenses which countries must say, well, if we take that into our organized crime or our general penal codes, whatever the country is, then that will be able to be an offense. And looking at other serious crimes. So offenses will be the participation in organized criminal group, like your racketeering that we have in South Africa in terms of the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, your laundering of proceeds of crime, which we also have in South Africa, brought in through that act, corruption, in our Corrupt Activities Act, as well as the other parts of legislation that other countries may have. And then obviously as an offense, the obstruction of justice. So there are also protocol offenses which are created for human trafficking and firearm offenses and the smuggling of firearms. So always when you're having to deal with prosecutors or investigators, or you are an investigator, and you want to assist the court to see the seriousness of these offenses, I say to the prosecutors and also to the enforcement agencies, not only looking at the sanction that the domestic legislation gives, but also you use it because you can say, well, internationally, you can see this case as organized crime, although, you know, and our country is a party there and a signatory there too. Therefore, if you look at this, you're not and above what your citizens here are saying and thinking through legislation, but you're looking at the international implications. It does give a difference to your impact statements in sentencing. So this applies, this convention we have transnational in nature, so anything going across the borders of entry and exit, and where you have an organized crime group involved, and there's the definitions of that. Okay, so what are the key implications of this convention to state parties like South Africa, Namibia, Kenya, or whatever, Malawi? It is the effect of international cooperation. So it makes international cooperation between countries possible if there's a state party. It talks about extradition in the Article 16, mutual legal assistance, and joint investigation. So when you're having to ask another country for help, you can, and they are others, they signatories, if there may not be a multilateral or bilateral, you can use the convention to be able to make that kind of legal connection in international law. It helps with special investigations like your controlled deliveries, electronic surveillance. As part of if there's not in a bilateral, you can do it in a way that there may be sort of a connection that can be done through countries, competent authorities on the MLAs, and therefore assist with that kind of assistance. The law enforcement or cooperation, you'll see it makes provision for that, so you can use that through your requesting of international cooperation with other agencies, exchange of information, coordination of operations and training. So in the wildlife trafficking side, we see that a lot. So we as a source country or transit as well. So our rhino horn the rhinos will be shot here, horns taken off, and then transiting through through various countries as transit countries to the source countries in China or Southeast Asia. The other very important convention which gives an international legal framework to what is corruption is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which could also be found and downloaded for free on the UNODC website. And here it criminalizes specific offenses where it talks to your party states having to implement this. That's bribery of public officials and foreign public officials, embezzlement, trading in influence, abuse of function, illicit enrichment, the bribery and embezzlement in the private sector, money laundering, and the obstruction of justice. So once again, you have a convention which South Africa is a signatory and a party, where the international framework then allows, as our country has done, it's taken those articles and made them part of our domestic forms of legal framework in various parts of the legislation. Another important aspect that you need to consider when you're dealing with wildlife is the word wildlife trafficking, the definition thereof. So if we talk to that, it's in relation to a specimen, and it means illegal acts by a person, whether for the benefit of themselves or another person, or for the purpose of importing, exporting, re-exporting, introducing from the sea, dispatching in transit, distributing, brokering, offering, keeping for offer, dealing, processing, purchasing, selling, supplying, storing, or transporting. So you'll see another important convention here which deals with this the trade, the legal trade in wildlife and products and specimen is the CITES. That is the convention in the trade in endangered species. And if you're going to have a look at that, it's very interesting. It talks about how we can trade legally in certain wildlife products, specimens, derivatives, but there's a framework that they set. And this is obviously the trafficking thereof would be in the side of the illegal side, where there's no legality in terms of this. So South Africa has taken that convention and put it into regulations under our National Environmental Biodiversity Act. And there it regulates what do you require? You require permits and licenses to be able to deal with import and export of wildlife products, the actual wildlife specimens themselves, derivatives, and that is a very important framework. So when you talk of CITES here in South Africa, and we talk about it internationally, it's always to do with the import and exporting and introduction from the sea. People often get confused with it when they talk about something internally only. Some of our ordinances talk about import and export into a province or out of a province, which is also regulated. But CITES and that trafficking then will talk about the international cross-border import and export and introduction from the ocean. So yeah, this is just there may be a slide or two, they may be a bit sensitive. So that is just to caution, because this is a case where I was on watching brief in Isimangaliso, where in the height, as you know, of our poaching, illegal killing of rhino, this is where you would have the source. This is the animal. This is the 3-year-old white rhino cow that had been shot. And the enforcement agencies managed to get to her within the day. And you can see she had died, but there was the cutting off of the horns. Now, that's quite a neat cut. And you can see forensically, there's a lot. Those who deal with forensic science will be able to deal with the substrate, where in terms of foot and footprints and shoe prints. We can talk about human DNA around the nose area. We can talk about the tool marks that are left from the axe, which was then forensically linked to this rhino through the bone chips and the marks that were made into the skull when taking these horns off. 4.2 kilo front horn, 2.5 kilogram back horn. But here, unfortunately, the enforcement agencies only went upon the confession and didn't think that other forensic links were good enough. Would be an overkill, and the confession was thrown out and the syndicate walked. So that was a harsh lesson learned by enforcement agencies. And this is the animal that died. And this is like many others that we find, and there is the source. But now these horns have to move through the various mechanisms and the chain in the organized crime network. So this is how you commonly start finding it. There's various ways, but this was found in a container or shipment where you're getting the plastic wrapped around it to so-called throw off the dogs and that. It doesn't really, the other ways that the dogs find this. So this is how the syndicates deal with it. And then interesting for those who deal with handwriting, markings, you'll see the other horn has got some markings on it. So the syndicates often mark this in terms of where it has to go, who it's from, which syndicate it is. And those can be actually very nicely linked if you find the handwriting samples or in some way the markings with the suspects later on. So these are just examples how the transit now has to actually take place. And then you'll see the forms where those actual horns being taken out, but there are other forms which they use. And yeah, you can see, and this goes to admissibility, those who deal a lot with these kind of photographs on the WeChat, Snapchat, WhatsApp, other platforms. Yeah, we actually have the actual photographs are from suspects where they're actually advertising, and you can see it's being weighed on a scale. And this goes to negotiation. You'll see there's communication in Chinese. And those are actually, it's rhino horn that's been cut up into pieces. And those are the offers for sale. And then we have something that's used as well. It's not just the horn is carved into these little cups. Some of them are very ornate, called libation cups. And if you didn't know, if you were a customs official or whatever, to look out for this, you wouldn't know that that's actually rhino horn that is actually being put for sale, and it's done out through electronic media. So those who are dealing with electronic computer side, the electronic data side, this is the frontier where all of this is actually happening, and this is important, where we have to go with admissibility for us as prosecutors, and in the trial stages, to be able to link and all obviously these devices with those that are involved. Oh, there we go. That's just a shot of an X-ray with actually the horns that they would pick up. You'll see on an X-ray there how the actual horn and goes about all this, the density, and there it's picking up the horn as it's been taken through an airport in the take on luggage. There's the volume of ivory that can be taken through, and busts that are made around this. And obviously here it all goes about morphological, or the actual non-human DNA, dealing with actually identifying the samples or taking the, and obviously as you guys would know, how to making sure that you follow the chain of custody for each of these, because that will all be challenged and been asked that this is all ivory. Is it African elephant ivory? Is it Asian elephant ivory? Is it walrus ivory? Is it narwhal ivory? There's all of this is being smuggled. So the onus being on the state prosecutors and the investigators to prove all of this. There we go. There's an ivory bangle. So, where you may have it being trafficked as a in its raw form, but it's worked as well. So you'll find chopsticks, you'll find these, you'll find little statues, and you'll see the morphological identification that the expert work off for those Schreger lines. You'll see there's lines there that they can start saying, well, that is an elephant ivory bangle, if you're looking at it morphologically. If you don't want to drill down to the actual non-human DNA, which is the animal DNA. There are the statues that are carved out of the tusks, and then these can be painted. Sometimes they make them look like wood, and off they go. And we know of a case from South Africa where our favorite sweet, the lunch bar, they had a sort of a recipe for it, and then they worked and they turned the ivory into bars which would be fitting into and could be covered by lunch bar material, like your chocolate and your rice and your nuts, and then the actual packaging was used, as well as the box, and the ivory was then trafficked and exported therefore way or trafficked through as sweets. So we've now said that many countries have a very good legal framework, or they are through the UNODC's programs and CITES programs, and the Food and Agricultural Organization for the UN, who I also consult to. They look at wildlife crime, the legal network where countries are asked to put into place legislation. And this is normally through especially in South Africa and Namibia and other countries where we are sustainable use countries. We are not protectionist. That means that you can get permits and licenses to hunt, to transport, to use, to exchange, all of the rest, but it must be done through a system of permits and licenses. And obviously, you guys who are specialists in these things would know this opens up the abuse, and we just see as far as irregular permits and licenses, such as your forged permits, fraudulently issued permits, stolen, altered, or reused permits. So you may just get someone who's deciding, okay, well, we just go without anything, or we go with using this veneer of legitimacy through the legal framework and getting this done. Obviously, that all can also work where you have a corrupt official who is just issuing these, and they may, obviously, in terms of the framework, all be legitimate. But then you need to go to the corruption side and work that way. So now these licenses are generally, some countries and regions have still permit books, and you guys would know how to deal with and examine this in your looking and understanding about whether these are legal and how they were made up fraudulently, or the book is being abused, or the electronically generated permits. That's just a different field of dealing with electronic data, the examination of that evidence, which we require to be able to be admitted into evidence in fighting these crimes. Yes, just an example of how even live parrots. Now, parrots are a massive trading item worldwide. So the more extinct these parrots are becoming, the more valuable they become to collectors. So those that are in the know in terms of parrots and all kinds of birds, any bird or animal, this is where the other field is. It's not just the actual product or derivative like the rhino horn or the ivory or the bear bile or the pangolin scale, or the lion bones, but it can also be a large trade in live animals. So there's a massive, massive market there which is being combated, and that is to illegally source them from the wild, because you don't want to pay all that maximum amount of money. So you get them sourced for you in the source countries, and they are smuggled in that way. They very often, there are large amounts of them. They are even sometimes not anesthetized like here and put into transport, into bags, boxes. They are sometimes painted different colors to try and throw off the officials. If there are serial numbers that they need, these get swapped so that it's a species that may be identified differently in the stud books. This is the same for plants. So you would apply for an export permit for a certain plant, and then before the export gets done, the different plants are put with those plants. Or as we've had imports of Goliath beetles from Peru and from some of the islands here to South Africa. So various alien species are brought in. And our species exported. I prosecuted a matter where a collector from Austria, a couple, had sourced indigenous snakes from KZN and brought in to swap the most venomous diamondback vipers and cottonmouth vipers from the US, all juveniles, all just as lethal. And they actually, I won't tell you which hotel, but they were actually about 70 of them were housed or kept in this hotel while they were trying to source our black, green mambas, puff adders, and the sort to take back for their collection. The cycads, those very old species of plant, this is a huge collector item, and those that you can see how they are measured in value, the size, the diameter of the plant, and this is a massive collector's item internationally. Over and above that, you look at the landscaping in all of some of the massive estates, and that these are often would attract, if they are cycads, they are on our threatened and protected species list in most countries, especially in South Africa. And they are disappearing out the wild. So they get sourced and they get taken out of the wild. They are also used as muti in many cultures, and therefore they get chopped up. So I dealt with a matter in Josini where around about 40 to 45 were found on the back of a truck, which were going to then be taken and chopped up for the medicinal market. Without, obviously, if you have a permit, and if you have to ask the authorities as a sustainable use country that could be legal, but these are all illegally sourced because many of them would know that you won't get a permit to take them out the wild. So these are the issues that the enforcement agencies sit with. And creatively, you'll find all different ways that people can smuggle. Here's a small viper that's been put into an old video cassette and put into luggage. Now, many of them are desert species, so they can survive, a couple of hours in flight, or even in the post. They get posted. So we've had spiders coming through the post offices, from various countries, import, export, seeds, various extracts of animals and plants, which are obviously, if it's going internationally, is against CITES, or we have a threatened or protected species list in South Africa, and also in our ordinances in the provinces where you have to get permits to deal with the specific species. But then the smugglers try and find ways creatively of dealing with things differently, because it all goes about profit. Why do you have to pay if you can source it this way and smuggle it? So we have collectors coming into our countries, and they specifically are there to capture these and then traffic them through our borders. There you'll find the X-rays of snakes that they pick up, being taken through and trafficked through our ports of entry and exit. So now you would know that detection is the first part where the officials or those that are working with this will have to look at. And obviously you'll start looking and doing comparisons, and they should be trained on looking at official seals of provincial and other enforcement authorities, or authorities that are dealing with the granting of permits and licenses. Samely with security stamps, security features, serial numbers, logos, handwriting, signatures, handwriting analysis, vital. It is a vital skill that we can use, and other alterations. Now, as we said, corruption here is a huge enabler, and your best framework can be undone, and in corruption in the various forms, with bribery, the exchange of various forms of remuneration, and doing favors. So all of those aspects, the UN, and as well as in South Africa specifically, domestic legislation caters for. And this is one of the more difficult ones to find if it's that kind of one-on-one. But at a huge scale, it can undo a country's legal framework. And you'll see there when I spoke to the convention, it talks to it in the private and value chain as well as the state. So the state officials working with private, or private state officials, working for their own gain within their various departments. And here, obviously, dealing with this, you as members would know that it's all around, especially on organized crime, and to follow the money from the corruptors, the corruptees, the bribors, the bribees, and then the money laundering. This is an aspect where a lot needs to be done to bring to book those that are dealing with this, and undoing, which could be an economy and stability of a country, food security, all of this. If you just look at how it affects our wildlife industry, our tourism, the economy of where, through corruption, where you have state officials who are on the front line that are dealing with the permitting, or those that are in the front line, like your rangers, who feel sometimes that what they can do is just send an SMS or drop a pin where they are seeing the best rhinos with the best horns in certain parks. That this is where, and they've been paid a small amount of money, but that animal will now be killed. So we're having this at a scale. We're dealing with your wild dogs. We're dealing with your pangolins being captured for their scales. We're dealing with the lions and the illegal side of lion bone and tiger bone, the industry. We're talking around the smuggling of all of those various species for the pet trade as well as the collector trade. Then your instruments and proceeds of crime, that's vital in dealing with combating organized crime. And, we have an effective asset forfeiture and preservation and forfeiture in South Africa, and many countries don't have these. And this is the only way that you're really going to deal with those along the chain of an organized crime group. Your levels 3s, 4s, and 5 upwards. Then your asset preservation and forfeiture, as I said, that's a very effective tool, and it gets talked about in the convention. So yes, other creative ways. Here's a tiger being smuggled, a tiger cub, in your carry-on luggage. The tiger was just drugged and was taken along for the ride. You can see they're even trying to confuse people. They've got like a little soft toy with it there. So this was found transnationally, trying to smuggle the tiger cubs for the pet trade. Very highly sought after in Southeast Asia and China is your tiger or your lion teeth. They get used as well, and they have a certain value, and you can see this is also put up on social media. Creative ways of smuggling birds, even fish, insects, eggs. They are put with stockings, and you can see there these are the smugglers that go on board and traffickers going on board aircraft or boats or whatever. Similarly, there we have birds being smuggled, and you'll find that reptiles, anything gets done the same way. Just like you would have your drug mules, you have people that would do this for a fee. So right, combating this is, you need here to combat the transnational wildlife crime and trafficking, you would need effective and focused specialized investigation. But often it's not that complicated. It's just being able to get the links, whether it's through documents, whether it's through direct evidence, whether it's your electronic data, your photographs, your x-rays, all of these links. And the more links we have as prosecutors, the better it would be to be able to put the best case on in the common law countries where there's the onus of beyond a reasonable doubt. A very effective way to combat undercover is organized crime is your undercover operations, your traps. Many countries don't have that. We have an effective under 252A of the Criminal Procedure Act, where with the Director of Public Prosecution's oversight and their input and use of agents, we then can move up the ladder into the organized crime networks to deal with, and it's a very, very effective way if dealt with properly and according to the guidelines given by the prosecution. We've already mentioned following the money, and the money laundering aspect of that is very important, as a crime, is an important aspect. Instruments and proceeds of crime, we've already spoken about that. Asset preservation and forfeiture, all of these must be used and sometimes underutilized. And then our punishment must fit the crime, and evidence and aggravation is a vital aspect, which I think is often underutilized to get very effective, sentences in these matters. So another big collective items I said is especially in our more dry areas, the collection of tortoises and turtles. So these are just a collection that are taken, and they're taken in these amounts by collectors. And this is an aspect which you can't believe the volume, because as being cold-blooded, they are collected in volumes and then stockpiled and then taken out by the traffickers. Another one that's taken from our northern, our more semi-deserts in South Africa are the armadillo-girded lizards. They're going into the peck trade in the east. They look like little dragons, and they fetch a lot of money, and therefore they are sought after. And there's been very good convictions by the enforcement agencies of Cape Nature and the National Department, those investigators in the Northern Cape in South Africa dealing specifically with this species. But there's some good cases where convictions of up to 10 years for those that are trafficking it. There were 2 Japanese citizens that have come and were actually convicted in the Cape for exactly the trafficking of these animals. So that would be the end of my presentation to you, just giving you the insight. So I just want to acknowledge those that are on the slide and thank them for either the photos or some of the information that I could put through to you today. And I wish to thank you for, first of all, the ACFE for the opportunity to present, and for those as the participants to be able to share some of my passion of assisting enforcement agencies and those who are interested to combat illegal wildlife trade and transnational organized crime. And I'm available to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Yes, very, very insightful. You can hear me, Kevin?
I can, yes.
Okay, yes, yeah, very insightful presentation again, and quite scary as well. I think I'm going to look at envelopes if I get them in the post. No spiders or no little vipers or rattlesnakes end up coming through those envelopes. But yeah, just a question here from Tanya Knutzer. She asked us, what happens to confiscated animals or plants, etc., if they survived, and B, if they died in transit?
Yeah. Now that's a question that's often, and it's a good thank you for that, Tanya. So those items, well, as soon as they seized, the veterinary health and obviously the protection of these species are vital. So indigenous species, like you saw those girded lizards, they are obviously photographed and they are then released. And because obviously they are exhibits. So those that can be tagged or those that can be photographed are then taken and then obviously released back, because we don't want those type of animals who are already on a threatened and protected species list to be killed. Often these animals are in a very distressed form. Pangolins, they eat specific ants and termites, and then they'll get fed porridge and things by the traffickers. And sometimes they are in a very, very bad way. But organizations around dealing with these animals are always there, veterinary health. And then once they are forfeited or they obviously then would be returned if they are indigenous. The alien species is a different situation. Then I remember prosecuting a case with lemurs from Madagascar. So we'd asked if we could return them to Madagascar, but because they've been exposed to South African veterinary possible diseases, often the countries of origin don't want them back. So then they are given to zoos or aquaria, depending what it is, that will be able to look after them in the best care. And that's often where these animals are then forfeited to in criminal prosecutions. But very importantly, is we're finding in my international dealing with countries as Nepal and India and all that, the trafficking of these animals into other countries is so massive that you may be sitting with volumes of alien species. And they're all asking, what are we going to do with all of them? And they're obviously trying to house them all, and it's a huge expense. But that is what's being done. So as these animals are being moved, they are finding them now in so many countries where they shouldn't be. And obviously they can't release them because they may be competitive and dangerous to their own species. So it is a major issue internationally, but this just shows you the scale of what is actually happening. Thank you for that question, Tanya.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, it's scary how these smaller countries are the ones that are actually sending out their protected or endangered wildlife to organizations and companies around the world. And the syndicates have obviously capitalized on this. And I think it must be a multi-billion-dollar industry internationally.
It is,
Yeah, the South Africa is a beautiful country. It's rich in fauna and flora. And I just want to know, where would we stand on a list as a targeted country by syndicates, if there is such a list? I'm sure you would have knowledge of that.
Yeah. So as you know, so in the classification of organized crime groups, and that, you know, I think, you know, because organized crime groups don't always just specialize in wildlife offenses, they are there to maximize all types of profit in all types of profiteering. So it's human trafficking, your drugs, your firearms, whatever. And so, you know, I think in terms of, because we are so rich in biodiversity, we would rank as a country where we are seen as a source highly by those international syndicates, because of the spectacular types of fauna and flora we have. And our agencies are working overtime to be able to not only protect against that, but you've also got climate change. You have the population of humans which are encroaching all the time on the ecosystem. So we're having a problem worldwide where if we do protect these animals and we want to release them, where do we release them to? So the focus is not just on the animal, but also on the whole ecosystem where it's staying, because it doesn't just help saving the species, but you could never return it back to the wild.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, globally, what would the estimate be that this industry generates in terms of US dollars or euros in billions?
It's a multi-billion industry on organized crime. It is one of the top three in terms of those earners who are dealing with organized crime and the wildlife and forestry and fishery trade. It's definitely in the top three of crime where the profit is so huge because of the scarcity of these items.
Oh, Kevin, thank you. It's actually scary, and it just shows you what impact it can have economically on any country, specifically in Africa, where there are countries that their GDPs are very low, and they target it as well for wildlife and drugs and human trafficking and the like. So the syndicates know where these soft targets are and where they can get through. And hence a question here from one of our delegates. How often are airport officials and airline staff involved in these operations, turning a blind eye and also being bribed to this effect?
Yeah. So that is a major issue to be able to, you see that there has to be a door. So these are the doors to exit and entry. And this is a situation where officials are involved, because organized crime would need these people to facilitate. So it is a common occurrence. It's not easy just to always detect, because the volumes, especially if you look at the harbors. So the enforcement officials can do as much as they can, but if you look at the container traffic, you are never going to be able to check every single container. So whereas corruption plays a part, the commerce and industry and trade, you can't stop that to search every single yeah. So yeah, you're going to get that as a facilitator, absolutely, officials. But that's when I address officials, I say to them that people will be coming to bribe and corrupt you. And it's just going to be, you're going to have to look at within yourself and your own morality as to what are you going to do, because everyone will, because you have to be the door. And it's you then who have to decide in your own conscience, are you going to allow it through? Are you going to take the money? And so, yes, it is a huge issue. And there's a lot of money that is there for people to be able to bribe and corrupt. But I wish to thank and say well done to those officials who are actually do not do that, who uphold the law, and those many officials there who are hardworking and are trying their best in sometimes very trying circumstances. And they are really our front line and our heroes in terms of dealing with combating of this crime. I see that Len has fallen off the network, so I will Yes, Anita.
Kevin, while he's trying to get back onto the platform, I have another question here from Billy Els.
Sure.
A comment and the question. He said, I defended Sagomas who were found in possession of certain plants, animal remains, etc. They actually buy these items at the markets in KwaZulu-Natal. One of these markets is actually promoted on the KZN Tourism Ngoma market. His question, should that not also be policed or more effectively policed?
Yeah, Willie, that's a very good question, and it's a very good comment. So what happens is this, is the agencies have to realize that when you want to enforce, you have to make sure that the law is obviously there, that you need to be able to look at the markets and to be able to look at, we have a very important and recognized community and traditional medicine aspect, which is all can be done through a legal format. So just like any other citizen, those who want to deal with breeding lions, or those who want to deal with the wildlife or plants in any way, that is what the framework is for all of the citizens. So if you want to deal with sustainable use, it needs to be dealt with in that way. So it's just a matter of saying, and we do know that when we're dealing with these items, the court will also say this, that if you are now in a market, which is a public place, and Willie would know that that's the defense would be that there is no knowledge of unlawfulness, because no one has actually come to us and said, listen, that is illegal. So that it could be a defense by my defense colleagues. So the enforcement agencies must look at this, because we cannot have a situation where there is a legal platform for everybody, and there is a recognized basis for traditional medicine and traditional plant use and all the rest, but it must obviously be permitted, and the communities must be given an opportunity to deal with it that way. Otherwise, we would have a situation where in some markets this can happen, and in another market there's enforcement. So the law must be there for everybody, and everybody must be dealt with in that way. So absolutely, that is a situation which I believe needs to be addressed if it's not being policed correctly.
Okay, Kevin had a bit of gremlins there with load shedding on and off. I assume you addressed Willie Els's question relating to the KZN tourism on the markets. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. One last question. What is the maximum punishment in SA for people found guilty of any of these contraventions?
Yes, so if you go and look, so our National Environmental Management Act, and it's the National Environmental Biodiversity Act and its regulations, in its sanction can make, you can go from between 5 to 10 million rands in fines or 10 years imprisonment. So it's regarded as a serious offense to traffic these threatened or protected species. So if it's on the threatened or protected species list, that is a serious offense. And obviously we have provincial legislation which also has those type of sanctions, but obviously the national legislation in which most prosecutors will charge with is those kinds of fines. And obviously over and above that, there are other forms of penalties of rehabilitation of wetlands if it's destroyed. And there are other sanctions that the National Environmental Management Act of 1998 sets out. So it's important that the enforcement agencies look at the wide ambit of tools over and above the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, which sets out all that is required for racketeering, the dealing with gangs, and the dealing with money laundering, as well as the various forfeiture tools and of proceeds of crime. So these are serious offenses. And if you look at the UNTOC, which is the transnational convention I spoke to, this will definitely be seen, these type of offenses with this type of sanction, as serious crime internationally.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I tell you, very insightful again, and a lot of food for thought for some of us that don't deal in this industry. And we might come across some of the syndicates dealing with money laundering that could be linked to this. So yeah, it's really something that we're going to have to think about going forward for our beautiful country specifically, and globally for all fauna and flora. Just want to thank you so much for taking the time today and the preparation and the presentation. I think a lot of us have gained some extra knowledge from someone like yourself that is internationally acclaimed. Kevin, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure. And to all your members, keep up the hard work. And yes, hopefully to meet you guys again. Thank you, Len. Thank you, Nita. Thank you for the privilege and honor.